All right. Thank you, Andrew, so much for taking the call with me. We'll be chatting today about data mesh. My name is Igor Garlowski. I'm working in a company called Data Dune, BI consultancy. And with me today is Andrew Jones, specialist of data mesh, author of book about the quality of data and data contracts. Thank you so much for being here with me.
No, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
So yeah, let's chat about data mesh. But I guess a lot of people who will be listening to this one actually might not have a good idea what data mesh is. So before we start and we actually go into the implementation of the whole thing, I just wanted to ask you, would you, using your own words, explain what data mesh is for those that might have no idea or only heard a couple of, basics?
Yeah, sure. Data mesh, it's a term that's coined around 5 years ago now by Shemek Degani when she worked at Fortworks. And it's basically the application of kind of software principles and software architecture ideas to apply to data in a way that encourages more decentralized model for data. And to try and solve some of the problems that I had with traditional data architectures, where data was tried to be centralized and became quite a big bottleneck. And it wasn't really delivering the kind of value that organizations wanted from their data. So as a reaction to that, an attempt to move to a more decentralized model, it defined a number of principles to help you achieve that. And yeah, there's quite a lot to data mesh, but in simple terms, it's basically that. It's basically moving towards a more decentralized model and leveraging some of the great ideas we've got in software engineering and apply them to data engineering as well.
Right. And the implementation is easy. We'll remove all the bottlenecks and all is pretty.
Yeah, not so easy, unfortunately. I think that's one of the criticisms of data mesh is it's quite a big change for many organizations. It's not just the tech, it's more the social side, the organizational change. And when I started looking at data mesh, it's around the time I started thinking about things like data contracts. And I liked all the ideas in data mesh, but I didn't feel like I could change the whole organization in that kind of way. I needed something a bit more approachable, a bit simpler to get started with as we move it. But I wanted to move in that kind of direction. I liked the ideas there. I liked the problems they're trying to solve, data mesh. I agreed with many of the solutions they're proposing, but it's it can be a big change and big transformation projects are difficult and don't always succeed. So starting with something smaller is often a good idea, and data contracts or data products, but using those kind of ideas might be a good way to get started on that journey.
Right. So I remember during my business school, we've been talking a lot about the culture, how changing the culture is so difficult that many CEOs would just say, I don't want that. I don't want to even think about it because it's not measurable. On the other hand, we have all the data problems, the monoliths we've been building. So now what you're saying is that we merge both problems together, both problems we didn't know how to solve, and try to solve them at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what it could sound like, particularly if you try and sell data mesh to maybe a CEO or the exec team as a whole, and you're trying to sell it as that big thing. And that is one of the uh, downsides of trying to do that is like you've got this huge thing you're trying to change in your organization, and that change on its own doesn't bring any value immediately. So what you probably want to do is identify where you can apply some of the techniques to data mesh to deliver value quicker, and then build on that success and keep buying that and make it a journey towards that, rather than having a big sort of top-down project saying we are doing data mesh and we're going to do it in the next 12 months or 2 years or whatever you like. Those kind of transformation projects, they rarely succeed. I think they're very difficult to get right.
Right, this is very interesting because this is actually what majority of people are struggling with. The theory is there a lot. There is your book. There are plenty of really good books at this point, and I think end of this year, one of the big gurus in the whole spectrum is creating this book of fundamentals and how to implement them. But the top to bottom, bottom to top, the hybrid mode, how small is small enough? Many people say that MVP is not a good idea at all because it doesn't actually show what to do. So, how to actually find the right size? Because every CEO will be here thinking, all right, how do I measure it? First of all, culture comes in point here. So, something is very hard to measure. Then you would say that data mesh is something that long term might be very beneficial, but short term, when you start doing it, it's hardly quantifiable, right? So, would you go for MVP? How would you decide how to actually begin this whole project in your company?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is it's not like changing culture isn't really the objective. It's something you might do along the way, but on its own, it's not delivering anything on its own necessarily, or nothing quantifiable, like you said. So you might want to change the culture, you might want to enable that, but you need to start with something that can actually that's actually demonstratable delivery. So something that's demonstratable variable. So um, the way I started with this in my organisation was we started as it's kind of MVP, kind of proof of concept. What we found was we identified an area where we wanted to improve quality of data. We had issues based on that, where data was not reliable enough for some of the use cases being used for. And those use cases were important to the business. They were valuable, they were revenue generating, they had clear value. And they were failing because things basically kept changing upstream and breaking it. Very common problem that many data pop teams have. Things change upstream, things break downstream, and that leads to bad outcomes for business. So identify some of these problems, and then we didn't say, okay, we're going to build a data mesh and solve this. We said, okay, well, these problems are main cause because the upstream data isn't dependable. Why is that? It's because there's no change management around data. Or why is that? Yeah, kind of five whys thing. And kept going through that, and like, well, people upstream, they don't have any responsibility for quality of the data. Well, why is that? Because they don't understand why it's important. The tooling we're giving them doesn't incentivize them to care about data quality. In fact, they didn't really realize they were data producers. We're just sucking data out of a database and chucking it into a data warehouse and hoping for the best. So, kind of went through those problems, kept asking why is this a problem? But we didn't just do that in isolation, we did it with them as stakeholders. So software in our team, in our example, it's a product engineering team, and we got them involved. And we started working on we all answered the problems, we started working on solutions together. They felt a bit of ownership from that, they were involved, they helped identify the solution. And eventually that became data contracts for us. What we can keep up there is that we are talking to everyone. We're talking to people who produce the data, we're talking to people who consume data, getting them together, identifying problem, working together on the solution so everyone's got ownership. And then that becomes a proof of concept. I wouldn't say it's MVP. You might build a minimal platform capabilities to enable that. So you've got a minimal platform there you're building, maybe adapting from an old one you've got or existing one you've got. So it's kind of minimal MVP in that sense, but really you're adjusting it as a project. You're trying to prove the concept of this different approach, and you should keep in mind become long-term goals you have there, but you're delivering value in the short term as well. You're identifying a problem that is a problem for business, and you're solving that problem, delivering value, and putting yourself on a journey towards a longer-term change that may involve culture change, may eventually involve a data mesh, may involve a new data platform, but not waiting for that to deliver value.
All right. So, should you start with one single department that is well connected or more focus on the actual data problems within a couple of departments? What would you suggest here?
I think probably starting in one is easier. It's more focused. And it doesn't have to be the most important data set or one that's got all the problems. Sometimes it's easier to start in one where we've got a department or team that is ready to engage with you. Maybe you've got existing relationships, maybe they understand the problem well, maybe they've got data people already full deployed there. So maybe they're quite a heavy data using department as well, so they understand the value of data. Whatever it might be, something that immediately gives you kind of a bit of leverage, a bit of alignment there, and build on that to try and solve problem. And once you do it once, you can then do it again and again and again and keep repeating this, but keep proving the concepts in small areas. And eventually, if you do that successfully, you start getting momentum and you start taking on bigger problems. So exactly what problem you choose, it really depends on your organization and the kind of relationships you've got and the problems you've got. But choosing one where you're confident you can have some success is probably the best thing to do at the start.
All right. But then if you are not choosing an important project, and I guess my question shouldn't be about the importance, but about how connected is this project? Would you consider this important that the data product that you're choosing is connected to, is serving multiple people? Because what I'm trying to think of is that you finish MVP, it is working fantastic. You make a change release and nobody cares because
Mm.
nobody's, or maybe one department is consuming it, right? So then you're asking for more budget and you're being asked to prove, have you done well? And you say, well, look, Joe says we're doing well. All right, that's not enough, right?
No, exactly. Yeah. So you need to. I didn't say it should not be important. It should not be. It doesn't have to be the most important thing. Like the key critical data set for your business. So maybe you're in finance and it's bank details or payments or something like that. Like that is the key, that is the most important thing, most critical thing, but it's also probably a difficult thing to change quickly and to deliver value quickly. But you're right, it does have to be something that is valuable, that you can demonstrate value from. So maybe you don't focus on those, but maybe you focus on a problem that your organization's got. So maybe it's a product they are building that is powered by data. It's not the core product, but it's alongside it. It's intended to drive some revenue, and it's not successful, or it's not reliable enough, or there's some problem there that needs solving. And it's not, if you don't solve it, the company's not going to like disappear. It's not ending the company, but it's important enough that you can get some resource together and solve it. And then you can show the value that you provide, that um you can show the value from that project when it's completed.
All right, so we have selected one department, we have selected several data products that are having some number of consumers, but none of them will end the company if we will do something wrong. Makes sense to me. What's next? Because now we need to ask for more budget or we need to ask for more push. So more people will be using it. Otherwise, it's just us in this bubble that are promising things to other people, but the other people are probably sitting there thinking, this is nice they're making change release. I don't have budget or time for this stuff, but it's nice other people are consistent. How do we push to the next level this change?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there are various ways to do this, I think. I think one is that, and it kind of goes back to a bit of the culture you mentioned at the start, is that when you start showing it successful, and you have to show it, you have to demonstrate it, you have to talk about it a lot, you have to celebrate that success. There's a lot of communication there, and a lot of it comes down to communication because when it comes to any kind of change making in business, it's all about people and people change, and tooling is there to support it. And data mesh talks all about people as well. It's mostly about people. So you found a problem, you've solved it, you've demonstrated that success, you're looking for the next problem and the next problem. You're going for bigger problems each time. In terms of trying to get budget or to get resource or to get alignment, maybe a couple ways to do that. If you have started to change this culture to one where people can see that this is a better approach to how we just do data because the results are better, the cost is less, or whatever metrics you're using, be it number of instances you're having those fewer, whatever metrics you're using to try and measure that success, you're demonstrating that they're going in the right direction. So you now starting to have this culture where there's a better way to do this. And if you can do that, if you start doing that, you can start getting these conversations going in different areas. You may not have to be in the room for those, but it could be things like your organization will have a way to prioritize projects, and it will have OKRs or quarterly planning or KPIs or whatever they use. Start bringing the data issues into those conversations. So maybe there's a new project being kicked off and it relies on some data. Make sure you flag that data isn't going to be reliable enough unless you also do maybe put a data contract around it or make it a data product, using whatever terminology you're using in your organization. start flagging about saying, if you want that project to be successful, we need some work over here, we just need you a bit of help here. Be part of those conversations. And that is probably the best way because you're making data just one of the many dependencies that a big project has. I mean, any organization, when it gets to beyond a startup, they've got multiple teams working together to solve a problem that's bigger than the sum of parts. Data shouldn't be different to that. So I think that's one way. I think another way is if you still can't get the resources you need to make the change you need to make because of whatever reason, you can try and think about how you can provide your own resources for that. Maybe deploy some people from your team into those teams. Now that depends a bit on the skills you've got in your team, whether you could do that. So, for example, my team, where I work, we are a data platform team, but most of us have background in software engineering. If we have to go and change a bit of software, a bit of Ruby code or whatever it might be, it's not our day-to-day job, but we could probably get by with a bit of support from them. So we can go and use our people, our resources, and make that change for them. But they maintain the ownership, and we could be clear on that. So that's another way of getting through without necessarily getting things prioritized and getting things moving without having to ask for big budgets, without having to hire new people, without having to get the whole company aligned. So that's a couple of examples. There's probably others, but finding a way to move things forward without necessarily asking for brand new budgets is generally going to be easier to move forward.
Yeah, for sure. I think majority of people ask themselves questions of, will it be more work? When I started speaking with my client for the first time about this, the first emotion was, we are already very busy,
Mhm.
right? So I haven't encountered any studies about it, but what is your experience? While you're implementing it, obviously there's some extra work, but once data mesh is running, do you need more people because of this? Are more hours being consumed? Or are we saving some hours because we are avoiding, for example, troubleshooting and putting fires down?
Yeah, it's a good question. And really, you're hoping to be saving these hours, saving costs, reducing the amount of effort you need downstream in your data teams, in your data engineering teams, all that kind of ETL you're writing, all that observability you're putting in, all that in the ETL, all that logic you're adding, all that case statements and if nulls and all those kind of things and coalesces. All of that is high cost and low value work. And the idea is you put a bit more effort into how the data is generated at the source, you can remove a lot of that effort. Not only that, if you put a bit more effort in the source, we can reduce the amount of instance you have, and that instance are another good source of cost savings. And there's instances are very expensive. If you think about like if you're wake up one morning and your pipeline's failed and you spend the whole day fixing it, not only is you can quantify that as a cost, the salary and times by the amount of people involved, the amount of hours they spent. Um, there's also opportunity cost because you didn't then move forward on a project you was hoping to move forward on. So there are different ways to measure this. Instance is a good one, but you can certainly link this to a cost saving exercise, and that should be the aim. You shouldn't be having to spend more to achieve data mesh. You should be spending less and achieving more from it.
Right, but that's only long term, right? I guess at the beginning, it is inevitable that you have spent a lot of time to research, create the contracts, change the culture, right? This must be time and money consuming.
I mean,
So
it does. Sorry, go on.
yeah, so when would you expect the break even to start being achieved? Like, is it within a year? I mean, obviously, it depends on the size of organization. Let's maybe say that we're working with whatever is your organization size. Is it 5,000 people? Whatever it will be, you can tell us, and then what will we expect? So people listening to this can have a better idea, because I think that it's very hard to put a finger on the actual, what is the actual thing that we are trying to achieve? Is it 1 billion in profit extra? It's not, right?
Mhm.
It's so hard to make the decision because it is not all about simply numbers.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the assumption in that question is that it's going to be expensive to get started, and I think that comes from you read things online on LinkedIn or whatever, and you see these diagrams about data mesh and what needs to be in place to have a successful data mesh, and there's a lot of boxes, and you look at that and you think, I haven't got any of those boxes, or I might have one, and I've got 30 more to build. I don't know, that's going to be expensive. I don't think, at least get started with data mesh, I don't think that needs to be a big investment. I don't think that needs to be expensive. So in my experience, we started off small, we started off bottom up. We're basically a small data platform team. I was tech lead of that team. There's about 5 of us, not a big team, and a company of about 800 people in total. Um, and we just identified a problem, we worked on it, we solved it. Yeah, it took a bit of thinking, a bit of working out. We didn't, but the actual building the platform itself, a minimal platform to get started with to enable this, which basically for us was basically define data contract, some change management around it, and all of this done where the owner of that contract and the owner of the data is the data producer. So in our case, the software engineering teams, product engineering teams. It only took us a couple of weeks to build like the MVC of that. So the MVP of that. So it wasn't much effort. But we were building on top of some existing things we had, like our infrastructure as code platform, things like that. But it's not a lot. And in my book, I've got one single chapter to build a very simple data contract implementation. It's only like 20 pages with lots of diagrams and lots of code samples. So it's not saying you have to spend like 6 months building this. And if you are going to spend 6 months building a platform before there's any value realized, then I think you're probably doing it wrong and you're not going to succeed. You're not going to get budget for that when it comes to 12 months' time when you still haven't delivered anything. So I think, yeah, the assumption in my question was that you have to invest a lot upfront to build this, but I don't think that's the case. And if you're not investing so much upfront, then you can start delivering quick wins and deliver value quickly. And you might not have everything in place. You might not have a great data catalog. You might not have all the governance. You might not have all the platform there. You might be doing a few things manually. But at least you're demonstrating that by moving in this direction, you have achieved something. And that might be reducing the amount of instance on this particular data product that then makes this the actual value part, the product, the application, the ML model, whatever it might be, made that more reliable and more successful. So you should be able to demonstrate a value quite quickly, I think. It shouldn't be taking months to do that.
Right. So is this the approach that you are taking in your book, driving data quality with data contracts? I noticed you have there a chapter called What Makes Up a Data Contract. And I was actually meant to ask you about exactly the same thing. I was doing some research. There is the Open Data Contract Standard. There are templates published by PayPal and other companies. And all of this is fantastic and massive. It's
Mm.
absolutely massive. If I wanted to introduce all of this at once, it would be such an overkill. But then,
Yeah.
because you don't know what you don't know, you don't actually understand what can you exclude and what is mandatory. You know that mandatory is who should own it, for whom it is, what version it is. What actual parts are in your important mandatory to start with, to create this MVP, to actually start make it roll?
Yeah, not too much. Like the owner, a version for data contract, which would be important when you start doing change management, schema, so that you can define the fields and the data types. And that's about it. The only other thing we did apart from that in our implementation was also categorization. So is it personal data or not? Is it confidential, secret, or public? Those kind of things. And we did that at the start because we knew from experience that trying to do that later is difficult. So where we wasn't using it at the start, I made it mandatory for all data contracts to have that categorization so that we could easily build our sort of privacy tooling, our GDPR deletion tooling, those kind of things. So that's what it is really. So inside the data contract, owner, the schema, a version number, and the categorization. That's all we needed.
All right, seems pretty straightforward. Let me go back to one other thing you were mentioning before. You said to keep celebrating. But my question would be celebrate what exactly? Because when you have a goal of reducing the amount of errors that we're having in our pipelines, I can understand that. But as you mentioned, a lot of this is actually cultural problem. So how do you create easy KPIs that you can show to the seniors and ask for more budget or to prove that the whole thing is working without creating an overkill on your team? because yes, you can track a lot of things, but you also want to make this data mesh actually work and not create a whole reporting system within what you're doing. So, do you have any specific KPIs that you would say, oh, those three are good? I think you can track them without spending too much time and money on it, and you can go with this up the level and expand data mesh within the organization.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of people struggle to, just more generally, to demonstrate the value they are creating as a data team. And it's difficult because you often think that, oh, we're trying to enable some sort of data culture or we are trying to enable better decision making. They are very hard to actually measure. I like things like instance and things like that, but it's kind of a bit of a negative one. It's like we're stopping things going wrong, but they are at least good to measure. They're quite, well, in some organizations, quite easy to measure, and some are quite hard. So we had quite a good incident culture organization where when anything goes wrong, there's an incident created and there's a Slack channel created for that, and there's a whole process around that. It's quite a light process, but it does allow us to get some data from the instance and go through them and look at causes and start tagging them. So that was quite a good one. On the other hand, a metric that's not so good would be something, and this is a mistake we made, something like adoption rate for data contracts and try and compare that, because that on its own doesn't necessarily deliver value, and it can drive the wrong behaviors. So if you're trying to target adoption rate and you've got different teams trying to work towards that metric, you might have some teams that are like, okay, we can get from 10% to 15% by doing these five data contracts. But those five are the easiest, they're used by like hardly anyone, and moving those over data contracts probably has little value. So you've achieved your metric, it looks like you're in the right direction, but you're not really delivering a great deal. So yeah, choosing metric is difficult. Something around cost is a good one, something around incidents is quite a good one. I've yet to find a perfect one. These are kind of proxies really for data quality, but it's very difficult to find a perfect one. So proxy is normally best you can do.
Right. Yeah, that only makes sense. I mean, this is something we've been discussing in Lisbon, right? Also assigning value to all of this. And is it actually worth doing something? So I'm really glad that you're mentioning it because a lot of teams are doing that. A lot of teams just want to be done with the KPI, move on, we'll think about it next semester. But focusing on value, however you will be deriving it, this is something that's actually going down to the bottom line of profit, even if you cannot track it directly. Uh, let's maybe continue, and I think this is our last question, running out of time. Let's discuss a bit more about contracts because you are the contract expert, all right? Like people are just looking up to you. You wrote a book about it. So would you share some common pitfalls with contracts? And it doesn't have to be at the beginning level. You already discussed what is the very minimum, and I'm actually super surprised that it's so simple. I was lately researching it, and my template is not a four field or five field like you just mentioned. I have to revisit it. Thank you for that. But yeah, any common pitfalls that people are committing in their contracts?
I think there's two really. The one we kind of spoke about already, but focusing too much on the tooling and not the people side, that's going to lead to problems. Like especially if you're building tooling, but you're not thinking about who's going to be using that tooling. So think about who do you want to write these data contracts? Is it your data engineering team? Then you should target it for them. But really, if you're looking for the kind of change that we talk about in data mesh and data contracts, where we try and move ownership of data a bit more left to those who actually produce data, then people writing data contracts will be maybe software engineers. So building a tooling for them, which means talk to them, understanding what they want, make sure tooling is where they expect it to be, which might be in a Git repo, might be in code, not in a web UI, somewhere else, those kind of things. So focusing too much on tooling, building it for what you want, not for what the authors of these data contracts want. That's a common problem, a common pitfall. The second one with data contracts is a lot of people focus on the enforcement side of data contracts, and that could be partly because of it's being called data contracts, and the idea of the word contract maybe wasn't the best choice I made. I was always supposed to be a placeholder, and I was supposed to think of a better name. My manager kept telling me to think of a better name for this, and I never got around to it, and now it's kind of gone. But when I kind of contract, I was thinking of APIs, and you think about an API as kind of a contract between the provider and consumer, and you can rely on it. It's got SLOs and things like that. That's the kind of contract I was thinking of. I wasn't thinking of a contract where it's kind of a legal document that was signed in blood, and if you breach it, there's going to be like fire coming down on you. That's not the intention. But some people, particularly on the data side, they get so frustrated with the amount of quality data issues they're facing, and they look at their contracts and think, "Oh, finally, we can control our software engineers. We can enforce this contract on them and make sure they give us good data." But all the language in that is wrong. It's not going to lead to collaboration. It's going to lead to friction. A software engineer is not going to be very incentivized to do that for you if I think they're getting blamed for something. And they're not sitting there trying to make our lives hard. They're not sitting there trying to give us bad data. They don't really know most of the time, but they are giving us bad data. They don't really know they've given us data. We're sucking out of their systems without them knowing it in many cases. Once they understand the problem and they get involved in by understanding the problem, they understand the impact of that it has on business, and you get involved in and I think about the solutions. They're going to come to similar solutions that we are. They love problem solving, software engineers. They understand things about interfaces and APIs and contracts. They understand all of that. So get them involved, collaborate with them. Don't see it as kind of an enforcement stick you can beat them with. Um, that's a problem I see quite a lot, especially on LinkedIn, where people talk about enforcement a lot. So that's not really the aim. The aim is more collaborative thing, providing them the tooling they need to give you best data and make sure they understand why that's important to the organization.
Right. So use it as a carrot, not as a stick. I think a lot of people are really afraid of that. But realistically, still, many people will be trying to fire others based on this one. This is basically an evidence, right? Now you have a proof that I promised you something, and then I change the fields, and everything downstream is collapsing. So, who is responsible for ensuring that there will be no witch hunt? Who is responsible for ensuring that this will be not misused, but rather will be elevating us as a company to make things better?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think, again, it goes a bit back to the culture I've been talking about. And you don't really want to be having a culture where there are going to be rich hands, there's going to be blame, there's going to be people being fired if someone makes a mistake or something goes wrong. Because things do go wrong all the time, especially in software engineering, data engineering. So things do go wrong. It's more about how we learn from that, how we act about that, I think is important. But it also goes back to like who is responsible for defining their contract and setting those expectations and setting um, you know, what happens when it breaches. And that's why I always strongly believe that the data contract should be owned and defined by the person providing the data, a data producer, so maybe a software engineering team. And they need to provide data that matches the contract, that meets the requirements of the users, but also need to be comfortable meeting that requirement, meeting those the expectations they set in the data contract. So meeting the quality definitions they've set, meeting the SLOs, whatever it might be. They need to be comfortable meeting that. I mean, yeah, they are accountable then for meeting those. And when it does go wrong, they are on the hook for it. But it wouldn't have gone wrong on purpose. Something would have gone wrong. Maybe a bit of bad code was deployed or some other thing happened. It was a mistake. So the main thing there is, okay, you promised this, it didn't quite happen this time. Let's learn from it. Maybe have some sort of learning process or post-mortem process on the incident or whatever the company uses. Think about how they can improve their processes, improve their technology, improve their code, improve whatever it is, to try and make sure those breaches don't happen again in future. And as long as you keep learning from past mistakes and make it part of our culture, you will have fewer incidents. And not only when you do have incidents and you do this learning culture, it's a great place for discussions to happen, which again reinforces the collaboration idea as well. So yeah, don't try and turn it into a rich hunt. Don't try and turn it into a blame game. Appreciate people make mistakes. Have a process for learning from those mistakes and doing better next time.
Awesome. Um, Thank you so much for the chat. It was fantastic. Guys, Andrew Jones, if you want to learn more about data mesh, contracts, book called Driving Data Quality with Data Contracts is out there. Follow him on LinkedIn. Amazing post, by the way. I've been following you lately and I'm like, this is good stuff. This is really good knowledge being there every week posted. Thank you
Cool,
so
thank
much,
you.
man.
Cool,
Hopefully
thanks.
we'll be talking again at some point, maybe another podcast. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks.